typically in history, we've thrown rockets away. We just trash them in the ocean, or they burn up on reentry. And so I even, in my master's degree at Michigan, we had a seminar class, and we had someone from old aerospace come in, the inventor, designer of a launch vehicle. And he basically spent half or more of his presentation just talking about how reusability won't work, saying that there's no point in trying innovation because we tried on the space shuttle to make it reusable. It was way less cost effective, just all these reasons. And then that was the big thing SpaceX has pioneered, proved them wrong, right? It's way more cost effective and it's way better, but we didn't know what we were doing in a lot of ways. And come end of 2015, I signed up. I said, hey, I want to go figure out how we can fly these again. And so did a lot of traveling and figuring out how to make sure these engines could fly again.
Welcome to the Happy Engineer podcast, the place where we help engineers like you to build your career, balance your life, and be happy. I'm Zach White, former engineer turned lifestyle engineering coach, and your host for the journey to the career and life that you desire. Hey, I believe that you shouldn't have to sacrifice your life to reach your full potential at work. And what we're going to bring you in these conversations and interviews are the strategies, the tools, and the mindsets that are going to allow you to experience both success at work and success at home. Hey, we do the best we can to keep this free from advertisements. Of course, I can't control what YouTube may throw up, but do us a favor and share this podcast with anybody who you think may like it. And don't forget to click the bell and subscribe and get notifications to our YouTube channel and for upcoming releases of the Happy Engineer podcast. I would love your feedback, and even more than that, love your story. Share with us how these strategies and tools are working for you. Would love to be in touch with you. Connect with us on social media. Find me at Oasis of Courage on Instagram, Facebook, or Zach White on LinkedIn. It's an absolute pleasure to serve you. Now let's do this. Brian, it's awesome to have you here, man. Thank you so much for making time to be with us and the engineer listening. I can't wait to see where we can go with your story. Your bio is just full of places that we want to explore. So thanks again for making time today, man.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Really looking forward to chatting with you. And like you said, seeing where this goes.
Awesome. Well, hey, we got to be engineers for just a moment. I'm curious, your time at SpaceX, what an awesome organization. So many people would love to be a part of that organization, and they've done some incredible engineering. And so just take us back to your SpaceX days for a moment. What would you say of all the things you faced at SpaceX? What is the gnarliest challenge that from an engineering perspective, what's the one that really was just a tough challenge for you? And feel free to geek out with us a little bit. What stands out to you as the gnarliest challenge in your SpaceX days?
I mean, at first glance, there are some fun, interesting, quirky projects. Even as an intern, you really get a lot of responsibility, and I got to dive deep on some wild projects as an intern in a couple different groups. But I think for me, my biggest accomplishment, the things that I worked on the most, I was most proud of, was engine refurbishment. So typically, rockets are single use. We launch satellites in order to get them up there. It's difficult beating Earth's gravity and getting going fast enough to get into orbit as is. So we usually don't try to get the stages back. And usually,
I'm sorry, it's difficult beating Earth's gravity. All I can think of is that movie, White Men Can't Jump. I'm sorry, keep going, man.
Oh, you're good. Yeah. So we typically in history, we've thrown rockets away. We just trash them in the ocean, or they burn up on reentry. And so that was the big thing SpaceX has pioneered, was ability to fly these first stages back to either a drone ship or nearby the launch pad and land them, and then do refurbishment and then fly them again. I mean, I even in my master's degree at Michigan, was told, we had a seminar class and we had someone from old aerospace come in. He was the inventor, designer of a launch vehicle. And he basically spent half or more of his presentation just talking about how reusability won't work, just bashing Elon, bashing SpaceX, saying that there's no point in trying innovation because, look, we tried on the space shuttle to make it reusable. It was way less cost effective, just all these reasons. And then, we proved him wrong, right? It's way more cost effective and it's way better, but we didn't know what we were doing in a lot of ways. And come end of 2015, we recovered our first stage, first stage. And I signed up. I said, hey, I want to go figure out how we can fly these again. And so did a lot of traveling and figuring out how to make sure these engines could fly again, what sort of inspections we have to do, what sort of rework we have to do, and how to do that while on the vehicle or off the vehicle. And I think the quickest summary of a big project was not the first time we reflew some of those engines or stage, but we actually took off engines from 3 different rockets and then put them all on the first Falcon Heavy demo and flew a bunch of just kind of beaten, battered, and abused engines on that Falcon Heavy demo flight that had 27 engines. Most of those had already flown to space and were refurbished by myself and all of the team surrounding us that got that done. And it's a wild project because they've been through a lot.
That's amazing. I want to touch on this idea you just mentioned, that there was a spirit of, okay, we're going to innovate and prove this guy from your seminar class wrong. And as a mindset to drive you, to keep you going when, failure after failure or technical hurdle again and again and again to overcome those challenges. How did that culture, that mindset of like, we're going to do this, we're going to prove that old school thinking wrong, how did that show up for you as an individual engineer or on the team at SpaceX?
It's a good question. I think, there's a lot we could say about Elon Musk, right? He's quite the character and he's quite the visionary and the dreamer. And he does have the physics and engineering background. And I think this is a case of his leadership being really strong. He looked at these problems from first principles thinking and knew that it was physically possible to do this and to make this happen, and that without this, we wouldn't be able to make space more accessible. We wouldn't be able to go to Mars, colonize Mars, or make space more for everybody. It was really just this idea of every talk he gave, you just say, rockets need to be more like aircraft. We don't throw an airplane away after a single use. We have to get the cost of launch down to basically the cost of fuel. It was just thinking through that and realizing that, hey, this, it's not going to be easy, but it is within the limits of physics to have it be done. And so we're going to get the smartest people in the group in the world, and we're going to work on it, and we're going to try, and we're going to fail. We're going to try, we're going to fail, but we're going to keep getting closer, and we're going to figure it out. And so it's just having that right culture and that right mindset and surrounded by people who are all moving in the same direction. One thing that I really appreciated that Elon once said was, a company is the sum of all of its vectors, where your employees are vectors. It's not just the magnitude, right? Someone can be a high producer and have a large magnitude, but if all those employees aren't pointing in the right direction, they can do more harm than good. It's really about getting people who are all doing a lot and all moving in the right direction.
I love that. The company is the sum of all its vectors. Amazing. So, Brian, let's back up then a moment. Engineers stereotypically are categorized as being risk averse, conservative, unwilling to challenge things, or kind of status quo thinkers, maybe even boring, if I'm just being totally blunt, right? Like boring. And your life, your story is anything but that. I'm really interested, if you were to just go back in your memory bank and say, what was one of the earliest moments for you where you felt that kind of facing fear, facing a big challenge, and you had that courage to just go for it, to step up to the plate in spite of that fear? Where was the first part of your life where you remember that being a part of who Brian is?
I think one time that stands out for me is actually when I left SpaceX was a pretty difficult decision. There was so much to love about my time and my work at SpaceX, the people, the culture, the technology. There's so much to love about it. But it just wasn't quite working for me at the time. My role wasn't sparking that true intrinsic passion in me. So I was looking for something else. And then I also was having some how do I say it? Kind of there almost like burnout. It was starting to impact my mental health a bit too. It just took a bit to realize that, hey, this is no longer the right fit for me. As much as I want it to be, as much as I want it to be a place I can stay a bit longer, extract more value out of, and put more value into, there were some warning signs that this was starting to kind of not be the right fit. And also that I had migraines getting worse. And it was just, I could feel this like weight of responsibility also
Mm,
working. You're putting humans on the rocket, you're putting billions of dollars of satellites on the rocket. It's highly dangerous. And I just felt a lot of stress and pressure in a way that I wasn't quite able to manage the way that I would have liked to, and wasn't able to quite get in the role that, really sparked that excitement. And so
yeah,
it was a difficult decision. So I think it was actually knowing when to leave and when to make the next step in my career that was
yeah.
pretty tough and took some courage.
So there's a couple of really key things you said. I want to connect the dots, and I know the engineer listening can relate to these same questions because I've had these questions. And you talked about intrinsic passion, and this idea of passion and enthusiasm at work comes up a lot. And am I feeling that day to day? And everybody's chasing passion and what that looks like. And then mental health, the stress, the pressure, and ability to deal with that. From your experience, do you feel like those two ideas are connected in some way? Like, what role does passion play in our mental health and ability to handle stress?
If you're working on something you're passionate about, if you're enjoying what you're doing and you're able to derive a lot of joy from that and keep stress out of it, I think that does help your mental health. I think in my case, at least, it's interesting because sometimes that doesn't always happen. Sometimes if I'm passionate about something, I get really excited. I get really wired about it. My brain is just always turning day and night. I like won't be able to fall asleep. It even turns into this thing where I'm half asleep and my brain's trying to solve a problem that's similar, but it actually doesn't exist. And I can't even wake up enough to reset. And so for me, it's about finding those things that you're passionate about, working on those things, but then also having the right boundaries and work-life balance to prioritize your mental health so that you can be highly productive during those hours that you want to be working, and the other hours that you don't, you can step into your parasympathetic nervous system and really unwind and do what your body needs. And everyone's going to be different on how they achieve that. For me, it's taking breaks, it's maybe meditation or movement, or even for me, I've never been one that really likes to eat at my desk. I like to take that lunch or dinner and just enjoy my meal and step away from my work.
This idea of boundaries and balance keeps coming up, and every engineer listening is we're building careers. You move up, you move up, you move up, you go for bigger success, and we often find ourselves facing challenges and trade-offs around those two areas. From your experience, and whether it's at SpaceX or with what you do now and helping engineers finding great fits with new organizations, how do you see boundaries and balance playing out as an engineer in industry today? What is a healthy boundary? What's an unhealthy boundary? What is healthy balance? Like, how do you look at those ideas, Brian?
Honestly, it's something I still struggle with a lot. It's difficult when you're in a role that there is some reason for it to continue after hours. At SpaceX, I was tied to production in some ways, and they were working around the clock. And so I was able to convince my brain that I would need to check my email or have my phone on me all the time. And now less so, but there's still things happening with candidates or clients. And I'm always eager and excited to be on top of those problems. It's really knowing when there are times to shut off, to put your phone on airplane mode, to not check your email. I had to make the tough decision, if you will, to turn notifications for my email off my phone, even the circle on the
Sure.
icon. And even today, I still can't help but click and see what's there, and it is addictive to me. And I think it's difficult, but it's catching yourself, right? It's so much of how we can improve and be our best self is reflective and looking out for the things that you're doing that might actually be harming you. And so I'm working hard on, at dinner time, I put away my phone. I don't check my email the rest of the night. Or on the weekend, I check it maybe once a day or something like that. Trying to establish those, first identify those things that are actually harming me, and then working out what boundaries to protect myself from them.
Yeah. Brian, I really appreciate, I just want to acknowledge you for being honest that it's hard. I mean, you're a guy who's made courageous decisions to shape your life towards your goals and dreams in a powerful way where a lot of people wouldn't make those decisions. And it's still hard. For the engineer listening, you'll be encouraged. If you struggle with this, it is hard. It is hard. And that's part of why having the support and a coach and people who can help you with those things can be really, really valuable. Brian, tell us, your story then from SpaceX to today. Boil it down into a nutshell. What all has transpired, and catch us up in the life of Brian from those days on rockets to where we are right now.
Well, I think it even goes back before that, because I've always been this person who did well in math and physics. And so I just naturally fell right into engineering. It was very natural for me to get into that realm of study and to succeed in it. But at the same time, I always had this part of me that was like, is this really who I am? Am I the person who's solving really tough technical challenges? Am I always crunching numbers or whatever it may be? And it just didn't quite feel right. And I think I always had in my mind that there was something else out there for me at some point. But when I was in college and I heard about SpaceX for the first time, I knew that that's where I at least wanted to start. And so it was too exciting to not. And so didn't get my first internship there, but knocked on the door of the same person who interviewed me and said no the last year. And he said yes the next time. But it still was there, that feeling, even at SpaceX, of this isn't quite right. That intrinsic, what is this? Like, what am I doing? What am I made for?
Yeah.
Wasn't quite there. And so
absolutely. Hey, Brian, let me stop you really quick, because I know the engineers out there, a lot of them are going to relate to what you just said about, I knew SpaceX is where I wanted to start. And whether it's a college student who has a dream company they want to go to first, or an engineering manager, director, VP, it doesn't matter what level, who has that like target. This is the place I want to go. Can you really quick give us a detour? What was it that you did to put SpaceX in the bullseye and then get it? A lot of people have a dream company, but they don't actually get there. What would you tell an engineer who has something like, oh, I would love to work at this place, but maybe they're feeling discouraged, like it's never going to happen, it's too competitive, or I'm not good ugh for that? What's the secret to landing where you want to land?
Man, that's a good question. I wish I had a special secret to share that unlocks that problem, because that is a big problem. And we run across a lot of people who are looking to transition into our industry or get a role at a specific company, and it isn't easy. There isn't a single secret. For me, I think it was largely about identifying where I wanted to be, and then just working hard towards it. One thing I did that was a little unique was I was ahead of schedule with my college courses. So I was able to start an internship in January instead of the summer. And, I still like to think and hope I would have been able to get a summer internship, but it was a different competition, right? There were so many fewer people applying. There were fewer spots for sure, but it was just different, right? I reached out to this contact I had and I said, hey, I'm going to be available in January. Can I work for you in January? And that was one way. but I worked hard in school, got good grades. I had really great internships. Each year I got a progressively more relevant internship. And so I actually owe a lot of thanks to someone in high school who had an engineering course in St. Joseph High School. And that set me up to get a drafting internship before I even started college, which then leveraged that to Whirlpool, actually, then from Whirlpool, GE Aviation, and so it just kept building on these things to get me closer and closer to my goal. For a lot of people that succeed at SpaceX or companies like it, they're doing student project groups. I was actually one of the very few people at SpaceX who never did a student project group, but we see this time and time again at SpaceX and at most of our clients. They really value people who get involved with these student groups. They're using their hands, they're solving practical problems through practical means. And I think that's really highly valued. And so I think the one tool that I'd recommend is actually not the path I took, and that'd be to prioritize getting involved in those groups.
Yeah.
FYI, the most reputable one by far is Formula SAE. That is always our client's number one preference for looking
Sure.
for people.
So if for our college engineers listening to this, take notes. Brian's giving you some gold here, but there's two things I want everybody to hear. It doesn't matter what career stage you're at that Brian's giving us. First thing is that the goal never changed, to get to SpaceX as that bullseye. You always held that in your mind, but you didn't constrain yourself to what traditionally we might call the shortest distance between 2 points. Like, I have to go straight to SpaceX for my first internship or it's a failure. That willingness to say, well, what's just the next step closer? What's the next step closer? What's the next step closer? And then you had the courage to reach out and say, I'm available in January. And a lot of my clients, I see this, and with engineers I talk to all around the world, it's like, Zach, I want to work for Facebook. I really want to work at Google. I really want to work at Nissan. Fill in the blank. Well, great. If that opportunity is not there as the next open door, to take a different opportunity doesn't mean you're not going to land still at Facebook. There may be a couple of next steps closer you need to take first. And so it doesn't matter, again, where you're at the journey. Brian's story is absolutely relevant in that way. How can you focus on the end game, but just keep taking steps towards it one by one by one? So Brian, I interrupted you, man. You were telling us about this feeling you had of, I'm so great at math and science. I'm landing now in SpaceX, but there's that feeling underneath it all that there's something more, there's something else. Continue for us where that took you.
Yeah, my next role was in the Bay Area, where I had this urge to try an early stage startup and see what that experience was like. Being able to wear a lot of different hats and be around that energy, which in some ways SpaceX had, but not in terms of the size at all. And so I knew that I could get to flex some muscles and learn more management, learn more sides of the business, and just try different things. And so that's the opportunity I took. And it was a really valuable learning experience. It was going fairly well, but it wasn't until Seyka, my wife, and I'm sure some of your listeners know Seyka well, but we were just talking one day. We're talking all the time, and we just had this moment of epiphany of, how could we not thought of this already? But my background as an engineer, but wanting to get more into the business and operational management, but still being close to the tech, still being involved with these companies, matches so well with her background in recruiting and talent management that we could form our own company, providing talent to engineers in our industry. And so it was just so obvious once we thought of it. And then it was also right around then that it clicked that this does check pretty much all my boxes, right? I still love nerding out about space. I still love understanding how things work and helping people to build these highly technical things. But I want to do it from a different angle and different approach. And this allowed me to do that while also kind of setting ourselves up in a way that we were really excited about at this stage in life.
That's amazing. So tell us tell us about AdAstra and what you do a little bit. And then I want to unpack some nuggets of wisdom for the engineers who they're looking to make transitions and build their careers. But tell us first, what do you do? What are your philosophies around engineering talent and how your organization works?
So AdAstra partners with all startups, so all new, agile, disruptive companies, specifically in the space industry. And then also we're getting into the autonomous drone transportation space as well. We go to these companies or they come to us for help, and they give us these roles that they're having a hard time filling. And we go and we search. We're just looking for all the best people that can do this job. We're targeting specific people for very specific, highly technical and leadership roles within our clients' companies. So that's kind of in a gist what AdAstra does.
So when you take a broad brush of all these organizations, and I mean, we're talking about a slice of industry and as one lens, but a lot of engineers can still take lessons, I think, from what you see across that client base. What are organizations looking for that is the makeup of a top talent, world-class engineering leader?
The biggest thing that comes to mind right off the bat is basically none of these smaller companies, especially, and these modern companies are really looking for project management or just people leadership. That's mostly not of interest until they're at least a couple hundred employees large. And even then it's still a bit rare, or there's only a few of people like that in the whole company. They really want people who are not afraid of getting their hands dirty and doing the individual contributor hands-on grunt work. And it's a little bit about being humble and just being excited to be working on the mission of the company and working with the other people at the company to do whatever it takes to help that mission succeed. And so if you're really motivated by management and people management specifically, it's going to be a little tough to get into a company like most of our clients if that's your siloed focus. And so still keeping your technical chops, those skills sharpened, and willingness to do them and step into other arenas in the company and grab responsibility. That's how you're gonna succeed at these organizations. Searching for the need of the company and grabbing it and just doing it.
Brian, do you believe that mindset, that culture around startups is something that large Fortune 500 type organizations want to adopt or need to adopt to advance and really be competitive? Or do you think it really is a unique thing about the startup culture?
I've been mostly disconnected from these larger organizations for some time now. And SpaceX has, for example, gotten to be 5,000, 6,000 employees. And they've often said, Glenn Shotwell, the president's often said that their biggest issue is how do they stay small while getting large, right? How do they keep this energy, this startup energy as a larger organization? It is a really tough problem. And I don't have a good answer right off the bat of how a large organization could do that, because there are logical reasons to having specialists and developing specialists, but then those skills don't translate very well to a lot of our organizations because people have been so siloed into developing very niche skills and aren't used to running fast and running without a lot of guidance or a lot of barriers. And so I do think these large organizations need to be looking for ways to cut down on red tape and bureaucracy. There's so much that doesn't get done just because of that red tape, and it really hinders the ability to innovate.
So if the engineer listening says, gosh, Brian, the idea of getting away from the red tape and bureaucracy and working in a small startup environment like your clients really excites me, but maybe they've been in engineering for a decade or more in a big company and they don't have that experience. What would be a couple of tactical things or practical things that they could be doing to start preparing themselves to be a great candidate in that different environment?
There's a couple things that come to mind. One would be within your own company, trying to break out of what you've been doing and take on a different role, even if it's just for 6 or 12 months or whatever it may be. Try to take on some other responsibilities, show that you can do more than this one thing you've been doing for the last decade or two. I think another thing is even just advertising your desire to be dynamic is huge. If we come across a resume and that's on a bullet at the top about who they are, is they're motivated to be in this environment, or they have that passion for it, or I don't know, kind of anything it could be. There's just, you gotta show me. If I'm just looking at a LinkedIn profile and I just see Boeing, Lockheed Boeing, and there's nothing on there that has anything to suggest that you're interested in doing anything outside of big aerospace, it's likely not going to be a good fit. But maybe you start a company on the side selling potted plants. Now I'm like, oh, this guy's a hustler, or this woman can really do other things. It's not just this one
Yeah.
thing. It could really be anything, but it's also about showing it and demonstrating it and then talking about it and showing that enthusiasm and that passion in the way you communicate.
I think that's great to look at what you can bring outside of the typical job description and add that in. Brian, when you say advertise it, sometimes engineers I talk to get really nervous about their current company finding out that they are interested in moving into the startup space. And what do I do? How do I navigate that? I know it's a really specific question, but it comes up a lot. Do you have any advice for folks in that space?
Well, the easy one, which doesn't solve the problem of the last question, but the easy one on LinkedIn is to say that you're open to work. That doesn't show up to your employer. It only shows up to recruiters and people like myself, assuming you don't make it public. There's an option for that. Otherwise, I would just look to even just include a quick summary about who you are at the top of your about you, and just use they're kind of gimmicky, right? But those words that are associated with the startup world, dynamic. I'm eager to be in a fast-paced environment. I like to solve problems and cut through red tape. Like, you're not saying you want to leave your company, but if I see that on someone who works at Boeing, I'm probably thinking they maybe want to leave their company, right? I think you can be a little creative there. And maybe even depending on your supervisor, you can be direct about that. We've hired people who have talked to their employee about the job offer that they're getting, their employer about the job offer they're getting. And so maybe depending on your relationship with your employer, they might support that because they know that that is where you'll thrive and do the best. So I can't recommend that for everyone. Be very careful.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So, everybody listening, Brian's not telling you to go tell your boss you want to quit, but at the same time, Brian, I really do think sometimes we make that out to be a scarier, bigger thing than it actually is. And if your heart is no longer in it with the company that you work for, to be honest about that with your leader in a way that says, hey, I'm not telling you I'm leaving in 2 weeks, but what I'm telling you is that I'm having a hard time seeing myself in this organization for the long term. And I'd like to maximize the value and opportunity, both that I'm giving the company and receiving, but also work with you on finding a great fit. You might be surprised how well your leadership and your company would respond to that in supporting your transition rather than you feeling alone in that.
And a couple other notes about that too. I mean, a large organization isn't policing LinkedIn. No, so you're now just worried about if someone stumbles across it. And so you need to sort out what sort of risk you're willing to take there. But then the other item is, if you're providing lots of value to the organization, they're not going to let go of you for something that you say about your interests on a social media platform, right? If you're delivering, then they're going to want to keep you, or at least have a close relationship with you. And that's not going to be a factor.
Awesome. So Brian, I know we're running short on time, and there's so much about job transition and engineering and the industry I want to ask you about, but one question that I'd love your unique perspective on, having been an engineer, you worked at SpaceX, you've worked in startups, and now doing talent placement and recruiting in your own companies, really broad perspective. A lot of times when we're looking for that next role, if it's a new company, there's a challenge in really understanding what is that company like? What are its values? What's the culture there? Will it be a fit for me? And do I want to make this decision? Is it a go or no go? And especially around values and culture, everybody wants to know, like, how do I assess that before I've actually landed the job and I go find out what might be the hard way? Do you have any advice or tactics that you recommend for your clients, people who are considering working for your clients, or just for the average engineer seeking that answer? Is it a fit? What would they look for?
So you definitely want to just take the interview process methodically and absorb everything you can during that whole process. The company isn't just interviewing you, you're also interviewing the company. And so there's a couple ways that you need to think about that. And one is, what are the questions that they're asking? How is this process going? And what can I learn from those items? And then also realizing that you get to ask questions, you get to get your questions answered before you start a job. And that is not a show of weakness at all. That is a show of strength. But it needs to be done tactfully, of course, with compassion and with the right amount of EQ of how to navigate that. And that's one thing that, shameless plug here, is that we're really helpful for. We can have really candid conversations with candidates and help them figure out how to get their answers, the answers that they need before they can say yes to an offer. Just knowing when the right time is to ask questions. Typically, you should have some time at the end of an interview. We've even had candidates come back and say, that interview process was a little quick. I want another interview, right? I want to talk to who my colleagues will be, my peers. I haven't met those people. I'd like to talk to them and ask them what they have to say about working for this company. All these things are on the table and they're not an issue or a problem. Just, find the right opportunity for them and ask gently, but also firmly, right? Just say, hey, I need this, and that's no problem. You need to get the information you need to get in order to make a decision. And even if at the end of the day you have uncertainties, whether it be about culture or compensation, and there's a gap maybe, we always recommend that you just state that gap and just say, hey, this is what I need in order to be able to say yes to this role. And if that's another interview, if that's more money, if it's whatever it might be, just state what you need. And they might say no. And then you say, okay, I wasn't able to get what I need. And you walk away and everything's okay. Or maybe they're able to provide it and they're happy to provide it. And now everyone wins.
This is a great mindset shift for the engineer listening, that you don't have to just play within the boundaries of the company's interview process. You can be a participant in shaping that. And it's not a shameless plug at all. Brian and his wife, Seyka, and their team at AdAstra, if you happen to fall in their niche around aerospace and what they do, absolutely should reach out to them, because they're fantastic at this. And it has a lot in common with coaching, this idea of not tackling that alone, being able to have those conversations. And I know Seyka and Brian are great coaches as well. So Brian, man, thank you so much. There's 1,000 things I want to ask, but let's land the plane here. This is the Happy Engineer podcast. And one of the things that I have found and really believe is that great engineering, it's like great coaching, in that the questions we ask are really important. Great questions help to shape our lives, and questions lead and answers follow. So if the engineer listening to this conversation wants to be happy, what is the best question you would lead them with? So
I would encourage the engineers out there to think about what areas of your company, your industry, or your business you're undervaluing that have a larger impact than you realize. Your idea for a product at your company is getting shot down, even though it solves a problem or a need. But the reality is that it's a marketing problem. You don't have a way of selling it because it would require too much educating of the public to convince them that there's a problem to be solved or something like that. And you just can be frustrated because you have this great solution. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to have engineers become more ingrained with what's going on around them if they're thinking about what areas they're not valuing within their company and their industry.
This is a really interesting question. I love having engineers on our podcast because thinking about your life, your company, your team, you could almost pick any context and apply this question. What are the areas that you're currently undervaluing? Look at it from a new perspective, a new lens, and then take action to go get into those spaces. And incredibly fulfilling and happy zones of your life could be underutilized, could be totally missed just because we're not seeing that. Brian, that's awesome, man. I really love it. Thanks for that. And there's so much more we could dig into, but I can't thank you enough for the time today. So tell the engineer listening, if they want to know more about Brian and AdAstra and the work that you do, where can they go to get more from you?
The best place to find us is on LinkedIn. We have our company page, AdAstra Talent Acquisition, and so that's the best place. We also have our website, adastrata.com, but honestly, following us on LinkedIn is the best. Connect with me, connect with Seyka on LinkedIn, and we'd be happy to be in connection with you.
Perfect. I'll put those links in our show notes. So if you're listening and you want to go out to the Oasis of Courage website and find that, you'll be able to get those links. And Brian, again, just thanks for leading the way, for helping engineers every day to advance in their dreams, to help the companies they work for, to find great talent, and for sharing your wisdom with us today. This has been really great. We'll have to find a time to reconnect and touch the other 20 areas of your story that we didn't even bring up today, brother. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. And thanks so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Hello, my friend. Zach White here again. And I wanted to let you know that's all we've got for this episode of the Happy Engineer podcast. Thank you so much for investing your time with me today. It is an absolute pleasure to be able to bring you this content. Just as a reminder, it would be amazing if you would subscribe and share this episode with any other engineers you know who may benefit from this. And if you're like me, I hope that you'll take some notes and, more importantly, take action. In our audio version of the podcast on Apple Podcasts and any place that you go to find podcasts, there's a little more content from me about this episode in the debrief. If you really want to hear about how to put this into action, I'd encourage you to go grab that. But thank you for joining us for the video version of our interview today. And again, can't thank you enough for helping us to get the word out about the Happy Engineer podcast and what we're doing. If there's any way we can serve you, would love to do that. Go find us at oasisofcourage.com or reach out to me on social media at Oasis of Courage. And don't forget again to subscribe and click the bell to have notifications of upcoming releases of new episodes of the podcast. As always, I want to leave you with this. If you stay in your comfort zone, you're not going to grow. So let's crush comfort, create courage, and let's do this.